it's Joe here. You auto know Joe, and I've done a lot of repair videos, and I've done some general business and car flipping advice videos, but this one is going to be specifically on how to inspect a car that you're looking to buy, either a private party vehicle that you're planning on keeping, or if you're trying to flip, this would be a good way to inspect a car that you're flipping, whether it's at the auction or at somebody's house. So here we go. It's just your standard engine bay. This is a V6 on front wheel drive, so the engine is facing this way with the crank pulley on this side, the transmission on this side. And let me just go over the major components here. You've got the battery. So what you want to check on the battery, these cables, and you'll actually notice there's a little corrosion here, kind of greenish white flaky powder, and there's a little bit more of it back here as well. You want to check for that. If it's super corroded, that's a good sign that either you need a new battery or the battery's just been replaced. This battery is from 9 of 19, so it's actually been replaced, and you can see on the positive terminal there's not really any corrosion, which is good. So if there's a lot of corrosion and the battery hasn't been replaced, factor in about $100 because you're going to need to replace that battery. Moving on to the brake fluid reservoir here, and it's a pretty common location. Pretty much all cars with hydraulic brakes are going to have the master cylinder for the brake fluid mounted against the firewall here. So you just want to pop that, make sure it's full, and it's this nice clear color. If it's dark black, or if it's gunky, or it looks like tar, you're gonna have to flush the brake fluid and replace it. And it's not a hard job to do if you're gonna do it by yourself, but it is kind of time consuming because you have to start with the rear passenger side wheel and work your way all the way until you get to the front driver wheel. So if it's dark black, factor in that you're gonna have to go ahead and flush that brake fluid out. So moving on, there's not a transmission dipstick on this vehicle from what I can see, but generally on front wheel drive cars it would be somewhere in this general area over here. You'd see a dipstick coming out, and for that you just want to check and make sure you have a nice actually the tranny fluid should be about the color of this battery cover, nice cherry red. If it looks like oil or if it's black, that's a sure sign that the transmission fluid needs to be replaced. So next up is the engine oil. So this actually looks okay. It's a little dark. See if I can get the camera to focus in on that. You want to see a little golden brown and to that second dot, and it's not. It's a little underneath. Let me to turn the flash off. So it should be all the way up to this second dot here, and it's you can see here it's still in the crosshatch section. So it's about a quart low, but it looks clean, which is nice. So no sludge or excessive oil buildup, so that's good. So it's probably going to need an oil change. No big deal. I don't think it was running low on oil for long, so that's not something I would worry about. The next thing to check in the engine bay, your coolant or antifreeze. Now on most modern cars, they do have a plastic container with the radiator cap. You might also see here on the radiator there's going to be a cap, and that is where you check the coolant. A lot of cars that have the radiator cap on the radiator will have a plastic coolant overflow container, and if that's empty, that's okay. All that plastic container is meant to do on those cars with the radiator cap here is to just catch any coolant. But on the newer cars, this actually has the overflow line coming back into the bottle, as well as the line down here that sends the coolant into the engine. So this is where you would check the coolant. On a car with a radiator cap on the radiator, you would open the radiator to check that out. So what we want to look for is color, and also to see if it's low. Now it looks fine. It's nice and orange, and you can see here on the side of the bottle actually This is the level, so this is within the acceptable range. If it was filled to the top, it would be here, and if it was low, it would be past this line. So this is an acceptable range. Other than that, what you want to look for is any noticeable leaks. Generally, they're going to leak around the valve covers. Here you'll see oil built up along the valve cover where these bolts are. You'll see it also on this side of the valve cover. And you want to look for any coolant leaks from these lines. These are fuel lines, so if that was leaking, that'd be really bad. Make sure all these connections are good. Look for any frayed wires in the wiring loom. Make sure all the sensors are plugged in, the fuel injectors. Make sure everything's snug and secure, and that's generally what you want to look for. Main important thing is to check the fluids, especially the transmission fluid and the coolant and the oil. And the last thing we can do, which normally I wouldn't do on a pre-sale inspection, but I always do it once I get the car back to the shop, is to just check the air filter. Super easy to do on this car. You just remove the clips and you can lift this whole assembly out of the way. I think. There we go. We can remove the air filter. We can inspect it. It looks pretty dirty, and it is very dirty. You can just see all that dust coming off of there. So this is going to need to be replaced. So I'm just going to leave that out for now. And the next thing we're going to do is move on to the suspension and the undercarriage inspection. And the next part of the inspection is the tire inspection. And what I like to do, you can do this when the car's on the ground. Just take a tread depth meter and check the tread. And this one is about 6 30-seconds on the inside. I'm sorry, on the outside, and 6 30-seconds on the outside as well. So let's go around to the rear. By the way, this is a different brand than the front. That's also something to note. So 10 30-seconds. We're actually closer to 11. So this tire is almost brand new here. 11 30-seconds again. Okay, moving around to this tire here. This one's 9 30-seconds, and this is also a different brand. And one thing I noticed, the sidewall is completely stripping. So this is no good, and this is not safe to drive on. So you need to check the sidewall, and you can actually see it's starting to crack all the way around. Right here. So this tire is no good, even though it has good tread. So it's very important to check more than just the tread. So we've got 9, we've got 11, we've got 6, and what do we have here? We've got 7, and we've got 5 on the inside. So probably going to need at least front tire. Well, probably we're going to need 3 tires, and if you're going to replace 3, replace 4. So that's why we do the tire inspection, because right now we need an oil change, we need an air filter, and we need a set of new tires. That's already $500. So that's why it's very important to inspect the car, because if you're buying it, you have to factor that in. So I'm going to remove the wheel now and show you what to check on the suspension. Now this is how you check the depth of your brake pads. You get a brake pad feeler gauge set like this, and you go in through the caliper, and you basically just put the feeler gauge that fits. So this one is too big, so it's smaller than an 8. So the next size down from that would be a 6. So it looks like the brakes are at a 6 millimeter. See that? It fits right there in between the pad and the rotor. And you want to inspect the rotors too. Check for any grooves or any wear. That feels smooth. I'm seeing some visible grooves here, but it should hold out until the pads need to be replaced, which will actually be fairly soon. So that's pretty much the brakes. Now, for the suspension check, you want to get a pry bar. And put the pry bar in here where the control arm is. See that? Right there. And we're testing the control arm bushings for any movement. So you just pry the pry bar, and this bushing looks really good. You can see there on the rubber, there's no cracks or any wear and tear. And same thing on this bushing, looks really good. And tie rod, same thing. That bushing is in great shape. The rubber is not cracked or broken. And then the ball joint, also great shape. The sway bar links here, you want to check the rubber on all of this. And then the last one is going to be the sway bar link there. Again, no rips or damage. The strut you also need to inspect, and for that you need to look at the shaft to see if there's any hydraulic fluid leaking. And you can pull up this dust cover, and it looks dry and it looks clean, so the strut is also good. And if we look up at the top at the bearing, it's kind of hard to get the light up there, but also you can see that it's in good shape. And it's a lot easier to do this with the wheel off, but you can actually still do it with the wheel on, which I will demonstrate on the other side of the car. Now the undercarriage, you can do this with the car on the ground. You just have to crawl under. Check out the oil pan, look for any oil leaks. Most common places are going to be right there on the oil pan gasket, the oil filter housing, or right here from the drain plug. And all that looks dry, which is great. And here is the transmission housing, which is also dry, so I don't see any leaks here. Around the back, very clean as well, so I think we're good to go. And here, so this is what you would do with the wheels on. Crawl underneath. You can see the lower ball joint. You can see the sway bar link up and down. And then you can see the bushings for the control arm right here. And then the one in the rear also very visible. You can see the rotor. You can see to some extent the pads, although not really. So that's how you would check the suspension and the undercarriage. Now let's move around to the back. So here we are on the rear wheel of the vehicle, and we're gonna check the brake pads, but we're gonna do it a little differently this time. This time we're gonna do it from the inside, and you can see here you can actually fit the feeler gauge right in here, and you can see it right there that it goes in. It's really hard to see, but this one is also 6/32. So press the flat part of your feeler gauge against the rotor, and then the rest of the suspension we're going to check out. Okay, that looks fine. The bushings are in good shape. The control arm down here, all the bushings are in good shape. The spring and where it's mounted here as well. Now there is a recall on this vehicle for the rear toe link, which I believe is right here, and that looks fine. I don't see any noticeable damage here. Here's your rear sway bar. Okay, sway bar bushings, nice and pliable, nice and squishy. This looks like it's been replaced, which is kind of like a tie rod. So that's how you would adjust the alignment. That's how you would adjust the alignment in the rear. Other than that, everything else looks like it's good from the factory. It's actually a pretty complex suspension setup. You've got the upper control arm here. You've got the spring. You've got the, I guess that would be the lower control arm. And then you've got the trailing arm. Then you've got the tie rod here. And this is actually the rear subframe where it's bolted up to the undercarriage, as you can see there. You always want to check the exhaust, and again, it's a lot easier on the lift, but you can just as easily crawl under here while the car is on the ground and do it that way too. So the sway bar has been replaced. It looks like the shield for the gas tank has been replaced. Okay, right there, that's what a worn bushing would look like. See how it's cracked and grooved? That's what you want to look for. So that definitely needs to be replaced. Other than that, everything looks okay. Also, that bushing right there is worn as well. Up here, it's not as bad. So this bushing is actually a part of the spindle for the wheel. And you can see this is the same part as the all-wheel drive versions. If it was all-wheel drive, that's where the axle would go. Right in that hole right there. But that's not really the point of this video. You can see the rear shock right here. You check that the same way you would check the front. You just want to make sure that there's no hydraulic fluid leaking. So that's basically everything that you look for when you're inspecting a vehicle. Hopefully that was a helpful video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and now it's time to get to work fixing up this Ford Flex.